Today's webinar is focused on CSA Group's Technical Information Service, or TIS, designed to support product designers and manufacturers early in the product lifecycle. With us today is Naysahn Saeed, the Global Business Director of CSA Group's Healthcare Division, to share a little bit more about how TIS empowers medical device designers and manufacturers to navigate complex requirements, meet product specifications, and successfully enter target markets. So with that, and as more people start to filter on in here today, Naysahn, welcome. It's great to have you with us here this morning. I will turn it over to you to get things started.
Thanks so much, Ben. Appreciate it. And the introduction there, certainly appreciate all the collaboration with Medical Alley over the years. You guys do a great job supporting the med device community. So thanks for all you guys do too. And happy to be here today, obviously, to speak about this with everybody too. So thanks everybody for joining. I'll spend the next little while here talking about how we feel technical insights and technical understanding help, fuel and create advantages for medical device companies through our experience, essentially. So I'll share some examples and things as we go through it. But thanks for joining today, and I hope we achieve that purpose for you. So I know it's a busy world we live in, and giving anybody any bit of time is hard to come by at times. So I'm going to start with the conclusion. I'll jump straight to the point here so that those of you who are going to jump off after 10 minutes anyway can do that. But, really the point is, if you have a competitive advantage, what is it in this day and age? In my experience, chatting with lots of medical device manufacturers over the years, it can be a number of different things. Some of them think it's their performance, their execution. In a lot of cases, it's the product itself, right? We're a year ahead of our competitors. We're 6 months ahead of our competitors. Whatever that advantage is, it usually puts some distance between you and your rivals. And it usually is time-based, if we're honest, right? There's some period of time where you have that advantage and they're catching up one way or another, whether it's through learning, whether it's through reverse engineering, whatever they're doing to catch up to whatever you consider your advantage in this marketplace. And so then that begs the question, what happens when you hit a speed bump in your process, right? If you had a 6-month lead on everybody else in the industry, and all of a sudden you're now set back 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months, where does that leave you? And what does that leave you with as far as an advantage anymore? So those are things that in general, I've never come across anybody who says, yeah, I'm cool. 6-month delay, we're good with that. That's okay. Nobody's ever said that, right? Nobody ever feels that way. And it's crushing when something happens and we end up in that situation, right? As a side note, that's when I'm interviewing engineers for our teams. That's what I talk to them about is probably one of the hardest parts of the job is when something fails, when it doesn't meet the requirements, and we have to share that with the designer and the manufacturer and whatever, and say, look, I'm really sorry, guys, but we can't certify this now because of X, Y, and Z. And that's literally the last thing anybody wants to hear from us, because it's slowing down everything they've spent the last months, years, decades, trying to achieve with this product. There's another side to it as well that I think, is really kind of powerful and important about this industry as well, which is, ultimately achieving the purpose, the goal of that product that you're trying to get on the market. And the very cool thing, the thing that attracted me to this industry in the beginning when I was graduating as an electrical engineer, is that you're helping people. This is a product that's going to get out there and help, patients, help physicians, help heal people when we're all at our most vulnerable, right? I mean, it's a really hard position to be in when we're injured, hurt, unhealthy. Our family is, our friends are. It becomes very personal, right? And the unique thing about this industry and the products that you guys are all working on is that they make a huge difference in the world, in people's lives, in our lives, in our families' lives, because ultimately they're going to impact all of us in one way or another. So that's one of the cool things about this industry, that yes, we're businesses, we have to hit profit targets, we have to get our products on the market. But in addition to all of that, and in most cases, in my experience through the years talking to people, this purpose is a lot of what's attracted people to this industry, is that they know they're doing something to help people. And so getting that product out on the market is a lot of times, much more important than just, yeah, we got to get it out, we got to launch, we got to hit our targets. It's This is really going to help people. This is going to make a difference in the world. This is going to improve quality of life. It's going to improve quality of care. And so, our organization is dedicated to that, to improving lives and making the world a better place. And so this aligns perfectly with everything we do and everything that you guys want to achieve. So, that's kind of the point, right? Is that we just want to get it done right the first time, right? We don't want delays, we don't want issues, and we want to get it done the first time. And that confidence to get it done the first time is almost always based in competence. You need to understand, what are the requirements, how do you meet them, and how do you get through that, in the same way that you have, most likely a team of incredibly talented designers, engineers, and all the supporting functions that help get this product to the market. You set out your requirements, you go through your whole design process, and ultimately you're hoping to get that product out on the market. And so, what we've seen with some of the more, let's say, established manufacturers, the larger folks we work with, they have people like our team inside providing that competence, making sure that the technical requirements that will apply to your product at the end are built in from the beginning, so that, look, obviously with your design process, with your research and development, there's going to be 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. That's fine. Those delays, you've built those into your process. And ultimately, we want these potential delays with compliance and meeting the requirements of the standards for you to be able to hash them out through your design process. So it's not, oh, we've made it to the end, we're ready to go, we're counting down, and then all of a sudden, these unpleasant surprises pop up with test failures or whatever the case may be. We don't want you to be in that situation. We don't want to be in that situation having to share that with you. We ultimately want you to fly through there the first time, get that product on the market as fast as possible, because that's what is the benefit for all of us, right? Certainly from the business side, but again, even more so from the purpose side of helping patients, helping physicians, and improving the entire healthcare ecosystem. So that was it. That's the point. If you're like, great, Naysahn, I understand it, I know what you do, got it, I'll reach out when we need you, that's fine. I appreciate it. I'm going to spend the rest of the time kind of talking through who we are as CSA. For those of you who don't know, I'll spend a couple minutes on that. And then I'll get through talking what are some of our services, and what you may be familiar with and what you may be not familiar with, and how we can kind of help you on the front end, making sure that you have the competence in-house to know that you're going to be confident once it comes to us for testing, that it's going to fly right through, and that you're not going to have any compliance issues. So for those of you who aren't familiar with CSA, haven't heard of us before, or worked with us before, CSA is an acronym. It stands for Canadian Standards Association. So at the heart and our core, we are a standards development organization, and we have been for over 100 years. And so that is really the heart of our business, and the core of our business is standards development, supporting, funding, and running research to support the improvement of those standards, for new standards, providing education on those standards, as well as advocacy within government, corporate organizations, et cetera, as to how and where these standards can help. Obviously, we're going to be focused on medical devices today, but the breadth of standards covers, anything you can imagine. Basically, we started with railroad safety, and we're obviously talking about medical devices today, and everything in between, whether it's consumer products, industrial products, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you might be surprised to hear, but developing and selling standards is not a particularly profitable business. So we are, in fact, a not-for-profit organization with this social good at the core of our business. Now, obviously, we want to continue doing that, and so we need to have funding sources to do that. And so in our cases, we have commercial subsidiaries, particularly testing, inspection, and certification work, which is what I'm representing here and talking to you. And with this service, we do this work, we generate some profits, which then, go back into the standards business to continue to develop, improve, launch new standards, and make the world a better place through that process. So what I'll be focusing on today is really the testing, inspection, and certification side of things. Um, I'll highlight some of the services that you're probably familiar with, some of them that you're probably not as familiar with, and how those can help you within the scope of a technical information service. So most of you are probably most familiar with us. If you are familiar with us with our certification marks, I think that's one of our obviously best known, brands, our mark that goes on your products, on consumer products, on industrial products, once they've been deemed safe. So you can see the marks here. Obviously, the CSA mark is the core. It started as a Canadian mark for documenting compliance with Canadian safety standards. And then obviously you can see there, with the expansion into the US, we also have a US mark. And then the most common one today, because most folks are selling their products in all of North America, around the world, to be honest, right? But the North American mark here, the NRTL mark, Nationally Recognized Test Laboratory mark, um, applies for Canada and the US. You can see with the small c in US under there. And so in most cases, that's what folks are coming to us for, is to get their safety mark for Canada and the United States. And then obviously the supporting services that go around that. So most folks know us for this, but the reality is there's a pretty wide range of services that we offer to support with product safety and certification. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not. And so the rest of the presentation, I'm going to kind of go through and highlight these, what their impact is to the certification of your product, and then how, of course, the technical information service can support that by incorporating that early in your design process, to ensure that you don't run into surprises at the end. Now, with all of these, it comes down to, what do you need, right? You ultimately will have to look at and consider all of these things to get through all of your regulatory requirements and get your product on the market. But you may not need all of these. You may not need support with all of these areas from us. But it's pretty common that folks don't know or are surprised that we operate in some of these areas. So I thought it worthwhile to take a few minutes and kind of break that down for you, to help you understand what are the different avenues you could employ a technical information service as well, to then get that information up front in your system. So the CB scheme is another testing scheme that essentially allows that data to be transferred internationally, to take it tested at any CB lab and take it to another CB lab in another country and have that test data accepted versus retested. It's been around for a long time. I think most folks are familiar with it, but it's very common that people want that testing done along with the safety testing that we do for the North American safety mark. There's a relatively new program when we talk about all these things, which is the FDA ASCA program. I'll spend some time on that later. So the FDA rolled out this program as a pilot program a couple of years ago, and just recently, I believe earlier this year, set it as a permanent ongoing program. So that will be in place probably in perpetuity at this point. Then there's other testing that supports the safety that's required, whether you do that, at the same organization, or sometimes people employ different labs to do different things. You have EMC, radio, environmental testing, and obviously custom testing and training. So I'll talk about these especially as an example later in the presentation, because these are one of the key ways, custom testing and training, that people take advantage of our technical information service. Training, obviously, to get the information up front, and custom testing to kind of do spot checks along the way. So that's really, again, at a very high level. Hope that makes sense. And from here, I'm going to take a little bit deeper dive into things for those of you who may not understand them, be familiar with them, and we can go from there. So the two marks, or the three marks I showed you at the beginning, it's really one mark delineating which standards you've demonstrated compliance to. Operate under essentially the NRTL system, which is the Nationally Recognized Test Laboratory Scheme. And that was rolled out by OSHA in the United States, essentially to ensure workplaces are safe. So the primary driver for this safety mark in most cases is that these devices are being used in either a professional or a home environment. And so they're around, people, and they need to keep these people safe, right? Obviously, the FDA is looking at effectiveness and safety when we talk about the safety mark driven by OSHA, and as you'll see, SCC when it ties to Canada. These are primarily for the safety of the users that are working with the devices. That they work or not tends to fall under FDA or Health Canada and the regulations they are looking at in a lot more detail, right? The safety piece is just one aspect of it. We get that, and that's part of it, but it is an important part of it. And this is, having a safety mark on your product is the most common, the most efficient, and the best way to satisfy that, whether you're submitting it to, the regulators in the US and Canada or around the world. The real beauty of this is that these standards are the same around the world. So whether you're in North America or Canada, obviously in North America, sorry, Europe, Asia, wherever you're going, the medical device standards, the 60601 base standard, which applies to most medical devices, or if you're in the IVD field, or lab test and measurement, it's the 61010 family of standards that apply to the products. And so that's what we hold our accreditations to with OSHA under this NRTL program for the US. And then for Canada, it's essentially a similar program. The enforcement is at times a little different. So it's generally a provincial level requirement within Canada. And so it's the provincial authorities that are enforcing this and reviewing it. But essentially, from our perspective, it's very similar because we hold an accreditation as a testing and certification organization within Canada, which then is what allows us to apply the mark and that mark be recognized by the local inspectors, whether it's the authorities having jurisdiction in the United States doing the audits there, or the provincial electrical safety authorities in Canada who would be checking the safety of those products to make sure they can be plugged into the electrical grid, working on the system, working in someone's home. So that's kind of the fundamental of where this safety mark came from, why it's important, and why essentially it's a requirement for any product that you're putting on the market, including medical devices. Again, like I said, the beauty of it with medical devices is that we have these harmonized standards that you can get it tested once and you essentially have the same standard that applies around the world. With other, markets and businesses, it's a bit different, but that's, there's enough hurdles in and regulatory requirements in medical devices that the nice thing is this has been consolidated, harmonized, and those safety standards that would apply to your product are going to be the same safety standards Health Canada is going to be asking for, the same safety standards the FDA is going to be asking for, and et cetera, as you move through Europe, South America, wherever you're taking your product. There's some national deviations at times that need to be incorporated, and we can, of course, help you with that. But the base standard is the same and really allows for, some nice efficiencies there that you just meet those requirements and you have confidence that the safety standards are covered for wherever you're going. Now, most people know us for that, and that's what you would come to us for. And when we talk about a technical information service, certainly that is, often what people want. They want to understand the standard. They want to know better what are the requirements so they can build it into their design requirements and make sure that they're ready when they get to the end and need the testing and certification to get that mark on the product and the test report that you can then send to all the regulatory agencies. But there is kind of a lot of broad additional testing requirements that are in place that obviously your medical device would need to meet to be able to get on the market. So safety is one of them. We kind of addressed it and talked about it here. It's probably one of the ones most well known to most folks. But even associated with that standard, right? So the safety standard for medical devices, the 60601 standard, calls out a bunch of requirements, not only for the product itself, but the components as well. So many times now batteries are incorporated in there, and obviously you want to ensure the safety of the battery that's working in your system. So having that certified already is one solution, but we can support with that if it's not, or if you're designing your own and you need support with that. Environmental testing, there are some requirements from that sit within the standard itself, and there are some that sometimes are imposed by yourselves for, let's say, your packaging and other things to ensure that the product arrives as intended, functioning, not damaged in shipping or anything else, right? And one new one that we're hearing more of now is energy efficiency. It hasn't been a whole lot of a topic in medical devices, to be honest, for the past many years, but I'm starting to hear it more and more now. Obviously on home appliance, commercial appliances, things like that, it's been a topic. In the US, you hear about Energy Star, and that's fairly common. Not as common in medical devices, but we are hearing some people saying they want that testing, and that's something that we actually do and have done for many years, primarily because of our consumer products division. But obviously, we can support any product and anyone with that who wants it. Then, EMC is a big part of the safety of products these days too. It's been around for a long time, but I know from my time being at a medical device manufacturer and talking about this topic, there's like one or two people who understand it, and it's black magic to everybody else. So the reality is it's a requirement, it's got to be there, and you want to make sure you understand it and are building it in. Ideally, hopefully you have some people in your organization that understand it and are prepared for it. But that's another avenue where we've seen benefits to, when you don't have that person, let us help you, right? Come to us with those questions in advance. Let us support you with that. And then beyond that, radio, so wireless communications are being incorporated more and more, obviously in consumer products, but also medical devices, right? Those are becoming more and more common to incorporate some sort of wireless aspect, whether it's wireless communication to the hospital, wireless telemetry for patients, or whatever else that you're incorporating in your product. There's a lot of additional requirements associated with that. So making sure you're prepared for that is another way. And then we refer to it as global market access, which is essentially a suite of services around helping you and facilitating that access to other markets. Obviously, North America, with the safety mark, we help in those ways, but then there's also other ways we can help, which I'll highlight again in a minute. So this is just to kind of summarize this again for those of you who just want to double check, make sure you are familiar with these or know what we're capable of. But I'll spend the next few minutes kind of going in a little bit more depth on each of these different topics. So let's dive right into one of, I think, the more common ones where more questions comes up currently, because it's in most cases more or less newly incorporated into medical devices. We've been kind of slow in incorporating that. I think that's always the case because of regulation, because of safety concerns, et cetera, et cetera. But these days, it's more and more common to have some sort of wireless communication or wireless functionality in products, and so then that is going to mandate that you have radio frequency testing done on your product. Many people say, okay, well, I'm buying a component off the shelf, I'm incorporating that, that addresses everything I need to address, right? And I think the short answer is sometimes. It's not always set. Sometimes that can be the case. What you've incorporated already has approvals and you can just kind of piggyback off of them. But that's not always the case, depending on the integration, any changes that you've made, even sometimes how you've located it within your product. Can then determine whether you're going to have to do some retesting as a result of that. So again, obviously we can do the testing, but in the context of what we're talking about today, engage early and ask these questions through a technical information service to be able to understand what's going to need to be tested or not be tested at the end. Because the last thing you want is to think, okay, I'm just going to, put in this off the shelf component and I'm fine and I can move forward. Last thing you want to do is find out at the end when you're just about to launch that no, that's not going to be acceptable. I'm going to have to retest. I'm going to have to resubmit and get approvals in all the countries that I want to go to. I mean, that's, again, devastating news to get at that point in the process. So again, we've noticed and we've seen, obviously, some of the larger folks have people in-house to figure these things out. If you're not in that position, if you're a startup, if you're a smaller organization, you don't have an expert in-house, feel free to reach out to us. Let's work together. Let's help you understand what those requirements are in advance to then make sure that you're not running into problems at the end of things, because that's ultimately what we're trying to avoid here, right? So again, we are a notified body for the Radio Equipment Directive in Europe. We can do the FCC testing, et cetera, everything that you might need to do the full testing here with our labs, to be honest, around the world. But in this context, reach out to us early, right? When you're beginning your process, when you're setting your requirements, if you're incorporating wireless communication, have a chat with us. Just figure out what's going on. Make sure you've handled everything that you're going to need to down the line. because you don't want to have that blow up on you at the end. Environmental testing, as I mentioned, some of that's going to be required based on the safety standard. Ingress protection, depending on the use environment, is kind of always there, right? You're going to be putting ratings on it based on the use environment, and so of course, if it's going to be exposed to water or dust or in an environment where you need some protection against that, IP testing has been a fairly common requirement for medical devices for many years. So that's not necessarily new. Hopefully, people understand it. But again, if you're new and you have questions, come to us early. Let us help you understand what those requirements are going to be and even what those tests are, how they're going to be executed, and what they're going to look like. So you're prepared for it and you know what's going to happen. Depending on the use environment, as more products are used in more extreme environments or are used in emergency services, whether that's an air ambulance or an ambulance on the ground. There are additional requirements for shock and vibration, for example, for climactic changes, et cetera. And, as we always have, we have the facilities to do that testing. But more than that, we can help you understand what that testing is going to be so you're prepared for it, so that doesn't end up as a failure at the end of the process. So obviously the product safety side we talked about, and the other side of it, which a lot of people employ as well, is for testing of packaging and things like that, that you set up your own requirements in most cases to ensure the safety of your product as it arrives where it's going to be. And so we can certainly facilitate that testing or help in preparation for that testing. Our sites around the world have the climatic chambers, thermal shock chambers, vibration test sites, and walk-in chambers that are needed to execute all of this testing. So that's all available to you, as well as our experts through a technical information service to help you understand how or where this is going to apply to your product and what kind of requirements you need to be prepared for. And then energy efficiency, again, like I said, this is something new. To be honest, we haven't had a lot of medical device manufacturers asking for this in the past. But with a lot of the changes, new requirements, and then also just positioning of businesses wanting to be more sustainable, wanting to be more responsible, they are choosing to do some of these tests and to get the Energy Star mark or whatever they want to document their efficiency. So that is something we've done for quite a long time. It's available. Again, even if it's something you haven't decided you want to do, but you're thinking, hey, I am curious, I want to understand this better. Again, that technical information service early in the process will allow you to connect with some of our experts, speak to them, and then kind of get that information from the people who execute the tests and evaluate it so that you're prepared should you want to pursue this in the future. Batteries. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning. They are obviously becoming more and more common. The technology has changed. There have been batteries in the past for sure, but we've moved to lithium now, and that will continue to progress as battery technology progresses as well, and more things maybe move to it. So batteries have their own safety standards as well, as you can see listed here. So we have testing facilities and capabilities to test and certify batteries as components themselves. But as someone incorporating a battery in your product, whether you're buying it off the shelf or you need a custom battery solution, you want to make sure you understand the requirements, what's going to apply to them, not only to the battery itself, but then incorporating the battery into your end device and the safety standards that apply to your end device. So again, technical information services is a great opportunity to ask your questions, make sure you have the right requirements in place as you're starting, to then make sure you're not running into problems down the line, with whatever you've chosen to employ in your product. Now, batteries are an interesting topic because I know in a lot of cases, the off-the-shelf one might not work, whether it's footprint or whatever else. And so it's fairly common, in my experience in the medical device industry, for folks to have, let's say, a custom implementation of a standard battery or whatever. And at times those aren't certified. And so then it becomes a question, how do we handle this, right? We have a custom battery, it's made by a known manufacturer, but either they want to charge us too much to certify it themselves or whatever. So CSA, unlike some of our competitors, are willing to evaluate that in product. So we can do that testing for you on that custom battery, and it can be certified as a part of your end product if you're not going to be able to certify it alone. Of course, if you want to certify it alone, we can support with that too. But yeah, if you're going down a path that is resulting in a custom battery that's uncertified, it's worth making sure you're speaking to someone to understand what are the implications, what are the consequences of that decision, and how do you then make sure it's not going to be a problem at the end when you're certifying your product with an uncertified battery. Obviously, technical information services is a great way to get that information up front if you don't have already internal folks well versed in that, so that you don't end up again in trouble at the end because you missed something that needed to be there. So global market access is a service that we've talked about briefly at the beginning. It's kind of a catch-all for a lot of different services, right? With the global nature of business these days, particularly with medical devices, I can't think of anybody ever since I've been working in medical devices who said, I'm only selling in the United States or I'm only selling in Canada. No, it's certainly at a minimum all of North America. And then very shortly after that, if it wasn't already in the plan, they think, well, why not Europe? Why not, why not China? Why not India, Japan, et cetera, South America? So that all kind of ends up being in product launch plans. And we have a team of international approval experts who can support with that. Again, it's a service we offer so they can help with that actual process. But the reality is, I know a lot of you probably do it yourself. So again, through a technical information service, you can have access to our experts to get that information that you may want or need about the activities you're going to undertake in a little while. One of the primary examples for medical devices, most people have their own folks to do FDA approvals, Health Canada, all of that kind of stuff. But with the incorporation of wireless communication or things like that, oftentimes folks are not prepared or don't have someone who's familiar with FCC requirements and approvals, or radio equipment directive in Europe, et cetera, and all the other approvals and certificates that you need to get to introduce that wireless product into these other international markets beyond the medical device regulation. So our team is well versed with that, can provide a lot of support with that. Again, whether it's the execution of that, taking care of all of that for you, come do the testing, we'll do the submissions for you, or just get the information up front so that you're prepared to do it yourself appropriately and you get it right the first time versus having to iterate, get stuff knocked back, and the subsequent delays associated when that type of thing happens. So a great and helpful service, whether you're employing it to actually get you on the market or whether you just need the information up front and then you can execute it yourself at the end. We mentioned the FDA ASCA program. So that, again, is a very new program. We hold accreditation to it under the pilot program, and obviously have maintained it as it's become a more permanent program. It is the accreditation scheme for conformity assessment, is the acronym. And in the FDA's own words, they say it's intended to enhance confidence in medical device testing, which should streamline conformity assessment elements of device review. So I think hopefully we're all fairly familiar with the FDA. They're never going to say there's a shortcut or there's a faster way of doing things or whatever. But this is a program that they've rolled out essentially to, as they say, which I think is as formal as they're going to say, streamline conformity assessment elements of device review. That essentially provides them with a great deal of confidence that the testing was done at an accredited facility with trained and qualified people, so that that part of their review maybe doesn't require as a deep review from their team, that they can have more confidence in what's coming in, and hopefully that then moves that process forward a little faster, right? They're hesitant to ever promise that for obvious reasons, but that's obviously the goal of the program. They've rolled it out. For those of you who are interested, we're happy to share our experience with you and tell you about it, but you can also go to the FDA website, review it there. It's open to anybody who has a laboratory. So if you're one of those manufacturers who has a larger laboratory, is accredited to 17025, the test laboratory accreditation standard, this is potentially something you could look at as well to then have this level of confidence with the FDA for any data you'd be supplying from from your lab. So again, we've accredited all of our labs through US, Canada, China, Japan, South Korea, around the world to be able to offer this service, to support those who are submitting reports to the FDA. So again, it's pre-market testing. So this is testing that would be done, and then a summary test report per the program requirements would be generated, and then that was what you would include in your submission to the FDA. It applies to essentially, in the pilot program, there was a limited scope of the recognized consensus standards that were included in it. I think they've included, truthfully, most of the 60601 medical device family of standards, as well as a few of the 61010 family of standards, primarily for in vitro diagnostic devices. So whether you're building a product in any of those in vitro diagnostic or medical devices, this is a new program, that the FDA has offered, and so it might be worth considering whether you want, one of these reports with your safety test data. And again, if you need more information on it, or you want to help develop the test plan, figure out if you want to use it, Technical Information Service is a great opportunity to talk with our experts, get an understanding of what the requirements are, what it would look like, and whether it makes sense for you as a business, if you feel like it would be helpful or not, before committing to actually doing the testing and generating a summary test report. So that's there. It's a new service. I think it's a great opportunity. I imagine, as all things with the FDA, when they start as voluntary, it slowly over time becomes just more common. And even though it's voluntary, everybody starts to do it. So with this being fairly new, I imagine it's going to continue to grow and become a more common thing down the line. So I want to spend a moment to just talk to you about something new too, since we're on the topic of technical information services. We are looking at offering something that folks have been asking for a long time. As long as I've been working for CSA, I spent a number of years, my time with CSA in Europe. And so then it was very common for people to ask us about, either MDD at that point. Now it's obviously moved on to medical device regulations. So we got a lot of questions about that. And obviously we would direct people to their notified body or whoever were the appropriate sources to answer that, because that's kind of outside the scope of our work. But we've also realized we have a number of people with a great deal of experience with medical device regulations or in vitro diagnostic regulations. And so we're currently working on developing some training programs to hopefully answer some of these questions that we get. Right. So coming soon, hopefully launching early next year sometime, we're going to offer European Medical Device Directive and in vitro diagnostic or medical device regulations and in vitro diagnostic device regulations, technical information services. So there'll be prepared training on certain topics within those regulations to kind of support the medical device community, support those folks who have questions about it and want to roll that out. So since we were on the topic, I wanted to share that with you. You guys are the first people to hear about this. So it's an exciting thing that we'll hopefully have early next year. If it's something that you're interested in, or you're like, oh, hey, I really need help with this, feel free to reach out, and we can get it to the team and see if they can start to develop some stuff to help you out with that and make sure we have that ready for you next year. So again, something exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be helpful. Like I said, I've received a ton of questions over the years on this topic. We've kind of had to send people other directions. So I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to start answering some of those questions and providing some solutions for those of you who have questions on that topic. So, to kind of summarize what we've talked about, this service is one of those things that we felt is really valuable and kind of underutilized at times, and probably underutilized by folks because they don't understand it or don't know that it's there. Like I said, a lot of our bigger clients have analogs to our team within their organization. They have engineers with certification background or with strong, safety standard credentials, and they provide that input within the organization, right? And when we looked at our customers that were much smaller, medium to startup organizations, they didn't have those resources. They didn't have access to that. And ultimately, this technical information service is a form of that, through leveraging our team, using our expertise, our team to answer those questions and have that information internally within your organization when you need it early in the design phase. So It's direct access to our team. It's in most cases some of the same engineers doing the certification testing and work for you when you're going to get the product certified. Um, and then, there's also some examples of team training, and we're not talking about our team, but your team. So obviously, we spend a lot of time training our team so that they understand the standards well, so that we implement in a consistent way, and that you receive the reliable quality service that you've come to expect from us, no matter who you're working with. So some of our customers, again, have said, hey, actually, we'd like you to train our team or provide some of that training to our team. And so we've done that. I think we probably do a poor job of speaking about it or advertising it, but it's something that we do, on a fairly regular basis. Whether it's one-on-one, or in most cases you want to train a larger audience. So one example from earlier this year is we had a customer who we've done this with them in the past, but they said, look, we have this particular standard that applies to our product, and we would like for you to come and conduct some training on X, Y, and Z clauses of that standard. They apply to us. We want not only our compliance team to get trained, but we're going to invite our whole design team, and we want them to understand it so that our design process and everything goes more smoothly. And so in this case, we sent one of our senior experts on site for 3 days, and we worked exclusively with them and their team and their questions. We provided them an overview of the standard, the requirements, what that means, how the testing is executed, and then, of course, spend a considerable amount of time just in dialogue with them. Ask the open time for questions to be asked, to go through them, to talk through them, understand implications. Well, if this, then that, et cetera, because that's, I think that's fairly common in my experience. You have a design team, you have a bunch of engineers, very competent, very good, working through things, but truthfully just don't have a lot of exposure, understanding, or experience with any of these safety standards. They don't typically come up in engineering school. You don't talk about these. You talk about requirements, but you don't talk about safety standards. They don't come up. So folks aren't familiar with them. They can be a bit of a dry read if you just have to sit down and read it. So a lot of times it's a lot nicer to kind of have a formal training, sit down, in this case, go off site for a couple days, and really focus on this and build up some competence in that area so that you have confidence at the end of the line that there aren't going to be issues. So that's a huge advantage of using a technical information service for some focused training on just the applicable parts of the standard that maybe your team has questions about, or you want to understand better, or you're moving into a new area. You're working on a product that's in a space you haven't worked in before, and so there's new requirements, and you want to understand them, before you get too far along the design cycle. Obviously, product approval and discussions. We talked about that in the GMA section, in the context of, are you incorporating wireless, EMC, et cetera, et cetera? Are there other requirements, approvals you have to gain before you can put that product on the market? Those are things that, our team can discuss with you in advance so you're prepared for it, or again, help you at the end when it's time to do that. Another one I think where it's been really powerful is when there's a non-compliance, right? So we've had many situations where a test fails. We try and give some input on, what was the test that failed, right? And what are some potential causes of that failure if they're not obvious. But then, the manufacturer's on their own to go and fix that. So, whether it's a preliminary review in the design phase to kind of point those out while you can still fix it, or for some folks, once it's in one of those unfortunate situations, the product has failed and they're just at a bit of a loss as to where to go from there. Obviously, we can't consult, we can't change the design for you, we can't fix it for you, but we can talk about what went wrong. You can talk through what are your proposed solutions, and we can help you understand if they're moving in the right direction, or if it's very clear that yes, that would meet the requirement, we can help you understand why that is. So that's another really helpful way to employ this technical information service, in an unfortunate situation, to kind of limit the damage, right? Obviously, I mentioned preliminary testing, custom testing through the design process, but also even just test plan development. Sometimes saying, okay, here's our design, here's where we're at. Let's say we talked at the beginning, we incorporated, the right standards, the right requirements. But okay, in our V&V, we want to include some internal testing on what you're going to test for the certification. So, in advance, determine that test plan that will be the safety test plan, and execute that internally. Go ahead and do some spot checks yourself if you're already going through that V&V process. Incorporate this into it, and then again, you have the confidence when you send it to us as an independent lab that it's just going to fly through and you're not going to have issues. So, the last piece with that is, obviously I've mentioned it a few times, earlier the better. If you start early in the process, you're going to know what you need to do. And, in most cases, you've got a great team, you've got really sharp people, they know what they're doing. So give them the information to make sure they're executing correctly, that there aren't surprises that pop up at the end. And that's ultimately what the benefit of this is. Like I said, we've seen some of the larger folks in the industry have this internally. And so they have this arguably advantage built into their organization simply because of their scale. But just because you're smaller, just because you're starting up, doesn't mean you have to forego that advantage. You just maybe need to look externally. And so we wanted to make sure you knew you have that access with us to get that information, to make sure you're incorporating it in your process, and that you're ready to go when the time comes. So thanks for your time today. I hope that was helpful. That does it for me for the moment. And we can open it up to questions if there are any, Ben.
Well, thank you, Naysahn, for that really substantive presentation. And I appreciate kind of the sneak peek at what's coming on the horizon for CSA Group and products and offerings as well. So thank you for your expertise and your insight. I want to remind our attendees here too, this is a time to ask questions to Naysahn if you have any from his presentation or about TIS or anything else that is in your world. I've got a couple of questions to kind of kick things off, but as those of you listening and watching this, the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, that's where you'd be able to ask questions, and we'll put them to Naysahn here with our remaining 11 minutes or so we have today. So Naysahn, first question to you really, as you think about like the size and the scope of your work within TIS, is there a minimum size for a TIS project?
So no, not really. I mean, ultimately, it's a custom request, right? So as large or small as anybody wants, right? I mean, it can be as large as a full testing project if you want to do a full custom run before you launch, or it can be just, we've had people say, like, I just want an hour of your time. I have this one question, I really need it answered, right? And so it can be as small or as big as anybody needs it to be, whether it's that 3-day on-site training, which truthfully is pretty big to plan that and put that on, versus, like I said, just maybe like a short Teams meeting with one of our experts to get a question answered.
Excellent. What are the advantages of CSA Group's network of laboratories for pre-market testing and certification? Really, how is this a benefit compared to using a local lab?
Yeah, I mean, look, ideally, hopefully we have some labs close-ish to you. I mean, I know for most folks, travel and moving a product around can simply just be a headache. And the other side of that is having your team available, that if there are issues or whatever, a lot of folks like to use something close by because then their team doesn't have to invest a lot of time in travel and things. So ideally, one of the benefits that we perceive with our lab network is that you have labs around the world. So whether your supply chain is in other places or you are in other places from your team, a team spread out at different locations, you can have a CSA team wherever you are. So you have local experts to help you out. You're hopefully not having to move too terribly far within your region. And then you're also going to get consistent answers, right? Because if you have one team working in one area with a smaller local lab and another team in another working a smaller local lab, the consistency of answers can change. They're great local labs. I don't want to disparage anybody. Some of the parts of our lab network are formerly small independent local labs. But consistency across those answers, and then obviously we talked a bit about the accreditations and things we hold. Those aren't always the same with smaller folks.
Excellent. We got a couple of questions coming in here from the audience too, so thank you for asking these questions. First is from James, who asks, where do patents and a perspective on the patent landscape in any particular area fit into what you do and a company's technical advantage?
No, great question. You're for sure wading well out of my depth, probably. But so we're not involved in patent law. Obviously, patents are an important part of any product, right? And they are a technical advantage, right? You've developed something that no one else has. It's novel, and you have it, and that patent locks it down for you for a period of time. So that certainly will secure some sort of technical advantage at some point. The question becomes, can somebody reverse engineer it and do it in another way, right? Or is there another solution out there that ends up solving that problem as well? So I'm not a patent lawyer. I can't comment on that. Patents are amazing. You know, those of you who issue them and win them, kudos for helping to move technology forward and improve these products. But you know, I think ultimately a patent won't always protect your technical advantage, because technology just moves so fast and people find solutions. You know, you want to get to market quickly, and you want that product there quickly.
Another question coming in from Sean. With your GMA services, you have talked through how you can help enable market access. Can you elaborate if you have any services to ensure continued compliance through design challenges, or design changes rather, and regulations changes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a constant challenge in this field for sure. So one aspect of that is just when the philosophy of safety from a safety mark requires follow-up. So we test and evaluate your product, and then we also follow up. So we have inspectors who then follow up and you know, monitor changes to ensure that the product that we tested and certified is still the product you're producing. So what that means is then we're then involved in any changes that you're making as well. You're required to communicate those to us. And so obviously we want to make sure those are successful and your product stays compliant at that point. So whether that's through an additional TIS to talk about it, or whether you're at that point already confident that you know what needs to happen, then you'll make the change, we'll test it, and you know, and the product continues to move along as a certified product.
Another question here, maybe also more of a comment on the upcoming MDR TIS service, asking, will that MDR TIS service be announced by newsletter in the beginning of 2025? Especially, I think they're asking about identifying the contact in each country might be of interest as well.
Sure. So, I mean, my email was at the front of the presentation. You can feel free to message me, and I'll keep track of that until we're ready to launch. But no, I think we'll be real, knock on wood, we'll be real vocal about it, because it's a new area for us. And we're, you know, like I said, we're excited about it because we think it's going to add a lot of value, given that so many people have asked us these questions over the years. So they, you know, don't hold me to this, but the current plan is they're going to be a number of different training offerings. We'll do webinar type trainings like this, whether they're individual for businesses or kind of something like this where lots of folks can join. And then we'll also probably do some in-person things. So that's not set in stone yet, but hopefully early next year we'll have a lot of information to share on that, and we're pretty excited about it.
Great. How does CSA Group handle non-compliance issues and help get projects back on track?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, ideally, we don't want to end up in that situation, but it happens, right? It's unfortunate. So I think one thing we always do outside of the TIS service or whatever, if you've opened a certification project with us and we're executing it with you and problems pop up, we really do our best to be communicative about that, right? That, hey, this test failed. We wanted to let you know. We'll get you some more information in a few minutes or whatever, right? And we break down what happened, what were the test results in most cases, right? If it failed, here's what the results were, and here's why it's a failure, here's the requirements, et cetera, because we really want you to understand what you need to do. Again, we're not a consultant, we're not allowed to, because we're independent, and that's part of one of the requirements of us being a safety certifier and NRTL. So we're not allowed to change your design for you, but we try and be really specific about what failed. Now, then that's where the TIS can come in too, that if you want to start talking about your potential solutions and where they're going and what you're doing, we can weigh in the context of what is the requirement. Does that sound like it meets it, or should we do a quick test to see where it's going if you're directionally correct? So that's where we can kind of really support in that process to kind of give you a little more confidence in the direction that you're going.
Excellent. We've got just a couple of minutes left here, so if anybody has any final questions for Naysahn, put them into the Q&A function at the bottom here. Otherwise, we'll wrap up in just a moment. Naysahn, I just had another question for you about, what are some of the key considerations for manufacturers before starting a certification project with CSA Group?
Yeah, I mean, one, you need to be production ready before you're starting a certification project, right? So that's part of where this TIS service is really valuable, right? Because from a certification standpoint, we're not starting until you have your production equivalent sample. But if we step back from that and we look at a technical information service, we can help you at any point in that process. So to start certification, you need to be production equivalent. You need to have your intended use so that we can then finalize what are the standards that we know we're going to have to apply to do that certification. But by that point, in most cases, everybody's pretty set in stone as to what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that's really where we feel like the value in this technical information service is that you can have that information well before you're even starting a certification project with us.
Excellent. Well, it is just about 11 o'clock Central here. I want to say another thank you here to Naysahn, to CSA Group for sponsoring today's webinar. We're very proud again of this partnership between Medical Alley and CSA Group, a very engaged and trusted partner here within the community. So we really appreciate your time today, Naysahn, and to the entire CSA Group team. Thank you.
No, my pleasure, Ben. Thank you, and thanks to everybody for joining today. Take care, everyone.
Yeah. And we've got one more reminder before we go. This has been all recorded, so if you were taking notes or you want to rewatch this again, we'll make sure to send it to everybody who was on today. Again, big thank you to Naysahn and the CSA Group team. Thank you to all of you for logging on wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Ben Wagner, and have a wonderful rest of your day.